Hello everyone! Welcome to another Whump Wednesday. So, this happens when spite fuels my writing. You want angst? Fine, I'll give you some. It's a KyouHaba idea I had for last year's Whumptober, including prompts like forced to kneel, held on gunpoint, and all that nice stuff. I hope you will enjoy, because I certainly did. Also, introducing a new warning for future videos, viewer discretion advised. Which means the story is going to contain at least one of the main three AO3 warnings: graphic violence, non-con, or MCD. I don't want to spoil the story, therefore I will be using this warning. As always, special thanks to my lovely patrons, you are keeping this channel going. Being in a relationship with someone like KyouHaba was interesting, to say the least. After all, there was a reason why they hated each other for the most of high school. They were just too different, like two flames clashing with each other over who was going to burn the world. At least that's how KyouHaba had always described it, making Kyotani grumble over his need to make everything poetic. But in the end, they somehow became one united flame, now living together under one roof. And he had no regrets. He didn't regret going on that stupid meeting Oikawa made 4 years after their graduation. He wasn't ashamed to admit seeing KyouHaba after so long made his heart flutter. And he didn't regret a single thing that happened during that night, because it all led to this: them living together as boyfriends in a tiny apartment just outside Sendai. He didn't have regrets, but sometimes he really wanted to bash his head into something. Like now. I'm just saying you could be doing a bit more around the flat. I don't remember ever seeing you do something on your own without me having to spell it out for you. Yatani growled under his breath, trying very hard not to slam the drawer he was searching through. Yeah, I don't remember you not constantly yapping either. I'm doing my fair share of chores here, you just don't want to see it. He didn't even have to turn around to know KyouHaba was clenching his jaw. After spending so much time together, he could vividly imagine the look of annoyance on his boyfriend's face, his narrowed eyes and arms crossed over his chest. It had always been like that when something didn't go how he wanted, which was quite often, especially lately for one reason or another. Fine, what was the last thing you did on your own account then? Enlighten me. Because as far as I know, I am the one cooking, I am the one cleaning and doing laundry, I am the one... Kyotani gritted his teeth and turned around, and KyouHaba flinched when the cupboard door slammed shut. And I am the one doing shopping and actually bringing money into the budget. It was a low blow. He realized it the moment the words left his mouth, and he saw KyouHaba's face fall, all anger gone and replaced with hurt. It wasn't like it was KyouHaba's fault he got injured and couldn't work for several months. And yet, he just used it against him like the biggest ass. They stared at each other for a long, silent while that felt like an entire eternity before KyouHaba avoided his eyes, clenching his fist by his side. I see how it is. He didn't look back when he stormed out of the kitchen, and Kyotani sighed deeply when one of the doors in the flat, probably the ones to their bedroom, shut close with a loud bang. Damn it. He leaned on the counter, taking a few deep breaths to settle the surging waves of frustration in his chest. They were still two different flames after all, no matter how deep their feelings ran. It was the thing that brought them together, but also sent them clashing, and then crashing backwards. Now who's poetic? He glanced towards the bedroom, debating whether he should try making things better before leaving for work, but then decided against that. It wasn't the first, and definitely not last, time they've argued, and if Kyotani learned something about KyouHaba throughout their lives, it was that he needed time to cool off before any apology could take place. Sighing, he grabbed the bottle he was searching for in the first place and his bag, and headed out of the apartment. However, the argument stayed hanging on his mind, making it difficult to focus. On several occasions, he had to be snapped out of his thoughts by the other members of the team, both coaching staff and the players. He always dutifully returned to watching their players and taking notes, but it didn't take long before he felt a light tap on his shoulder again. "Are you okay? You're spacing out a lot today, even more than usual." Yotani huffed and ostentatiously avoided the woman's inquisitive gaze, but deep down, he knew she was right. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." It was no secret he missed being an actual player on the team. Not just once during every training, every match, he caught himself wishing he could be the one spiking the balls over the net instead of sitting on the bench with a notebook, making notes. But he had no choice. He had to lay low if he didn't want unpleasant things to happen. He and KyouHaba both, even though he never told KyouHaba the true reason behind him terminating the contract and settling for a much less visible place on the team. Because as much as he wanted to stay playing professionally, being so much on people's eyes was a bad idea. This way, he was still close to volleyball without the cameras being pointed his way. Volleyball was his life, his calling, but so was KyouHaba. And he would be damned if he messed up. He hummed in surprise when the team manager sat next to him on the bench, nudging his side. "Did something happen?" "Why do you think so?" "You are never this quiet. You always mumble something under your breath when you write. So something must be heavy on your mind." Yotani sighed, pretty impressed others could read in him this easily. Or perhaps it was because he was really out of it that day. "It's personal. I argued with someone and I think I hurt them." "Something big?" "Not really. That's what's worst about it. It was stupid." The woman pursed her lips a bit. "Then, wouldn't the best action be to apologize?" "I'm planning on it, but I'm not sure what to say. We've been arguing much more recently and I don't know why. It's frustrating." "Well, if that's the case, then I'll just pour my heart out. That usually works, right? I mean, I don't know that person, but as long as the apology is genuine, it should be okay." "I guess." He clenched the notebook in his hands, crinkling the paper a bit. Of course he knew she was right. There was no need to think too much about what he was going to say as long as he meant it. That was important. And to try avoiding situations leading to arguments too. He nodded at her in thanks and returned to watching the players do drills with newly found focus. It was going to be fine. It wasn't the first time they argued. That's just how they were. At the end of the day, they still loved each other. They just had to talk everything out properly. It was going to be fine. The street was nowhere as busy as usual when he walked home later that evening. It was always pretty dark whenever he left the gymnasium after afternoon practice, with only the street lamps and shop windows illuminating the pavement. But there was still a certain hustle to the street he walked down through. But not today. Not that Kyotani complained. He definitely didn't mind he didn't have to push around a crowd to get home. And he even managed to buy KyouHaba's favorite chocolate, among other things, along the way without having to stand in the line for ages. The bag with sweets was now dangling by his side, and Kyotani hoped at least some of the things he bought were going to help him win his boyfriend's goodwill back. It will be fine. We've been through wars. Right. They made it through a lot of obstacles already, including breakup. They were going to be fine. He sped up, a sudden need to make it home as fast as possible taking over his mind. It was strange given he had no idea if he wasn't going to encounter a silent household, but something just urged him to rush as fast as he could. And so he did, listening to his instincts for once. By the end, he was almost running, only taking care of not slamming the boxes with sweets against his thigh too much to not destroy them. The last thing he wanted was to bring KyouHaba broken means of apology. He only slowed down when he spotted the silhouette of their apartment complex against the night sky. He let out a deep sigh, catching his breath for the last run to the front door. I hope he's not as mad anymore. Or hurt. That wouldn't be good. With his heart beating fast, both from running and nerves, he took one last deep breath to fill his lungs with oxygen before he sped up again. Almost there. Found you. Kyoutani froze mid-step, chills running down his spine. But before he even managed to turn around, sharp pain exploded in the back of his head, and the world went black. When he came about again, he found himself in an empty space, cold and so dark he couldn't see the walls. Though judging by the concrete floor, there wouldn't be anything interesting on them anyway. He tried to move and hissed, only now noticing his wrists and ankles were bound to the chair he was sitting on. Unsurprising. Truly, the only surprising thing was that he was alone. Or at least it seemed like it for now. He flexed his muscles a bit, hoping to loosen the rope enough to slide his hands from under it. It was an old trick he learned when he was a teen, and it came in handy on numerous occasions. Of course, he was sure he could just break the chair if he put in enough strength, but a silent solution was always better than a loud one, even if it was less efficient. No need to strain yourself, it's firm. Kyoutani clenched his jaw and fists, but he would lie if he said the voice didn't set off all kinds of alarm bells in his mind. I had to try. You were always so inefficient. A low growl reached his ears, allowing him to finally locate the place where the man stood. It probably wasn't the best idea to provoke in a situation like this, but he knew his ropes. Showing even a tiny smidge of fear would be even worse. You sure have guts to talk back to me. Kyoutani shrugged, his eyes, finally getting used to the dark, settled in the corners enough to see the entourage of men wearing the familiar scarves around their faces hiding in the shadows. It was a whole deal then. You know me, I can't resist. He tried the ropes again, feeling them loosening a tiny bit. It wasn't much, but as long as he kept going like that. He stopped in his movement when footsteps echoed through the space, and then the face of a man he hoped he never had to see again appeared in the little light coming from some hidden light bulb in the ceiling. He gritted his teeth, a sudden urge to get up and take him over the head with the chair arising in his muscles. Maybe you should remember who you are speaking to. Kyoutani was moving even before the man raised his hand. He swung back with the chair, using his full strength to either tear the ropes around his ankles or break the chair. The cracking of wood told him the chair legs gave up first. He swung the whole chair behind his back where he felt one of the men approaching, before he grabbed the handles and took a better aim swing at his past. The man avoided him and yelled orders at the others, turning Kyoutani's attention to the slowly surrounding him danger. However, he was aware the chair wasn't the best or strongest weapon, and indeed, after just a few hits, the wood shattered in his hands into splinters. But at least his arms were now free. He didn't get to enjoy freedom for long, however, since the number of opponents wasn't something to underestimate. He knew them. He knew the way they worked. He used to wear that scarf too before he dedicated his life to the one he loved, leaving his old life behind. But when facing imbalance in numbers, all his inside knowledge was mostly useless. He groaned through his gritted teeth when hands gripped his shoulders and squeezed, the pain shooting through his whole arms and back. Still, he refused to give up even when his arms got twisted behind his back, a satisfied grin making its way to his face when he heard the huffs of struggle from the men around him. That's all? You sent a bunch of gorillas on me, I call it a day? That's pathetic, even for you. The man leaned closer to his face, but still far enough not to get headbutted, Kyoutani noticed, his teeth bared. I told you before, you don't get to leave the organization just like that. Now kneel and beg for forgiveness, and I might let you off lightly. Kyoutani barked a short laugh. Yeah, right. Definitely. The pressure on his shoulders grew on strength. He braced himself with his legs and pushed back, swinging at the closest man to his side, A kick into the back of his knee made him waver, but not enough to send him to the ground. Come on, we had this discussion before. Isn't it a definition of insanity? How's your ear healing, by the way? To his surprise, the man smiled at him, almost proudly showing him the side of his head that lacked ear, a favor from Kyotani from their last meeting 3 years ago. Kyotani paused, the sight of the man's smile scaring him more than anything around him. I see you haven't changed a bit. Well then, maybe it's time to remind you that crossing me is not a good idea. He motioned to the side, still watching Kyotani with a wolfish grin on his face. Bring him in. A door opened somewhere by Kyotani's side with sharp screeching, followed by dragged footsteps and rapid breathing. With a strained yelp, a man with his hands bound behind his back was thrown forward on the floor in front of him. Kyotani's blood ran cold. KyouHaba looked up at him, his eyes widening when their gazes met. Horror washed over Kyotani when KyouHaba opened his mouth to speak, but fortunately, being the quick thinker he had always been, he stayed silent in the end. He quickly checked for any major injuries KyouHaba might have sustained, the dark and their positions making it very difficult. There was a small cut on KyouHaba's lip, but otherwise he looked unharmed. Though considering the situation, it served only a little to comfort Kyotani. Just heaving as his eyes darted frantically around, apparently not yet used to the dark, KyouHaba's face scrunched with pain occasionally when he moved his arms and the bones dug into his skin. A soft whimper fell from his lips when the other pulled his head back by his hair. Must say you have a pretty good taste. He's a pretty piece. Kyotani startled, already opening his mouth to disavow any connection between him and KyouHaba, but the sneer the other gave him silenced him. You don't have to pretend. I know who he is too. You would just waste my time with your lies. Ken? Kyotani's heart broke hearing the weak tremble in KyouHaba's voice. He didn't have time to think about where he made a mistake and led his past to KyouHaba. He just had to figure out how to get him away. To safety. He had to admit that KyouHaba held himself together surprisingly well despite his eyes being filled with panic and fear. Or perhaps it was the confusion clearly visible on his face that kept him from breaking down just yet. It's fine, don't be scared. What's going on? His words turned into a choked cough when he got hit harshly in the face, and Kyotani saw red. Leave him alone! Well then, now that we both know what's in the game, how about you show some cooperation? He pulled KyouHaba's head back up by his hair, tearing another strangled cry from his throat, though his eyes didn't leave Kyotani. Kneel. Kyotani's mind raced. The thing he was scared of the most was happening right in front of his face, and he had no way of stopping it. Even if he did what he was told and submitted, they weren't going to get out of there unhurt, if at all. He knew that all too well. He couldn't go down on his knees if he wanted to save them. The only chance they had was if he stayed standing and ready to fight. All that ran through his mind in a split second, yet the hesitation had to be apparent. His line of thoughts got snapped by a light metallic click, the sound turning his blood into ice even before he saw what made it. He didn't have to anyway. Seems like he doesn't like you as much as I thought. A strangled whimper fell from KyouHaba's lips when the muzzle of the gun touched his temple, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. What a shame. No, stop! His eyes straight to KyouHaba, meeting his, now full of tears, and looking at him with fear and a silent plea. There was no other choice, not anymore. He let himself fall on the concrete floor and lowered his head when he spoke, his own voice sounding alien to him. Let him go, please. He has nothing to do with this, it's just between the two of us. I'll do anything, just let him go. I'm begging you, don't hurt him. Ken? He looked up, giving KyouHaba what he hoped was a reassuring smile. It's okay, don't worry. Everything will be fine. The man's sneer widened. See, wasn't that difficult, was it now? He lowered the gun to his side, letting KyouHaba take a shattered breath, and crossed the distance to Kyotani, leaning down to his eye level. There's just one little problem with that. It's all too late. Before Kyotani realized what that meant, he walked back to KyouHaba, stopping right behind him. You have to learn that messing with me has consequences. No! The gunshot shattered the air as if it was glass. Hot blood splattered his face. His throat closed, choking back the horrified cry trying to get out. The soft thud of a body falling on the concrete floor, draining all warmth from his skin. The world, already dark, turned grey in that moment, the only colors remaining being the dark red mixed with silver. He was then thrown forward towards the quickly growing puddle of blood before a grave silence, interrupted only by his hitched breaths, settled around him. As if in trance, he reached forward, his hand trembling. The pale skin under his fingers was the same as he remembered from the morning, soft and warm, and yet so cold, without any life left. His vision blurred. He didn't even get to apologize. He didn't even get to give him the chocolate. He didn't even get to say goodbye. A long, tormented cry rattled with the building, carrying agony and tears into the night. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed. Now, I'm well aware that I kinda broke the happy ending status quo that was going on the channel, but considering how cathartic it felt to write this, no one is safe from now on.